Hello, I'm Angie Polkey, and some of you will know that I campaign on trade to raise people's awareness of trade negotiations and trade deals and how we could make them better for people and planet. And up until fairly recently, I've been thinking about trade negotiations as a kind of a battle between governments, if you like, as with the current UK negotiating with the US about a future US trade deal. But just recently, I've begun to feel huge compassion for the American people and what they have to put up with in their own country, because a lot of the issues that we have around trade, particularly with the United States, is that they have much lower standards than us. And we don't want to have our standards, our high standards lowered. But if you think about it, all the American people are living with those standards already. And trade is very pervasive, so it doesn't just, you've probably heard about chlorinated chicken, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how trade deals can really work against what ordinary people would like to have for their welfare and for the well-being of their communities and the country as well. So I'll give you an example. Let's look at healthcare, because we've all been very aware during COVID of how incredible the NHS has been, even without its lack of investment, even without the lack of investment from previous successive governments. That hasn't been enough for the NHS to keep up with demand. But that having been said, in the USA, medicines, including prescription medicines, these two aren't, but medicines are 4 times more expensive in the States. And of all the industrialised countries, medicine, the cost of healthcare in the States is much more expensive than any other industrialised country, and they have the worst health outcomes. So we really need to keep an eye on our NHS. But as you know, in a previous video, I've highlighted how farm animals are treated. Again, we've all heard of chlorinated chicken. But you know, farm animals are treated with a lot more different chemicals in the US compared to in the UK and throughout Europe, of course, while we've still got the European regulations. And some of those chemicals may have serious effects on human health. So we have to be very vigilant that we don't start eating food that is contaminated with those chemicals. And just to give you a really sad example, baby food. This is a spoof of a packet of baby food made by Global Justice Now. But it says, with traces of arsenic and pesticides. And the truth is that in the US, 95% of baby foods are contaminated with toxic minerals, and an incredible 73% have traces of arsenic in them. And in the US, they do not have regulations governing baby food manufacture and quality. So that's really something to worry about. Let's also think about energy efficiency and climate change, because in the UK, you're probably very familiar with either this type of bulb, a compact fluorescent, or this type of bulb, an LED. Well, in the States, they do have these types of bulbs, but they are still allowed to sell the really energy inefficient incandescent bulbs, the ones that we used to have that used to get incredibly hot because they were so inefficient. And many of our homes would have been running on 100-watt bulbs, 60-watt bulbs. These days, 9 watts, 11 watts is very typical. So that's a massive difference in energy consumption. Just going back to food, genetically modified ingredients are in the majority of US processed food. So if I buy anything that's been manufactured in a packet or a can or some other packaging, is very likely to have genetically modified ingredients in it. And extra worrying is that food poisoning is a really big problem in the States, and it's up to 10 times higher than in the UK. In terms of vegetables, here's a Here's one of my homegrown organic beetroot. I've got an onion somewhere. Here we are. Here's my homegrown onions, all organic. I'm afraid to say that in the States, there are higher not only higher levels of pesticides in the vegetables, but they can contain up to 72 different chemicals that are currently banned in the UK. And if you have a look at apples, apples are not necessarily, if you don't buy organic food, you may still have traces of pesticides in UK produce or UK imported produce. But I have to say that in the States, apples are allowed to have 400 times the level of some insecticides than we would. And grapes apparently about 1,000 times. So if there can't be a better argument for not drinking American inorganic wine, I would have thought, because it would be absolutely concentrated in any wines that are made with American grapes. And the sad thing is that, and very worrying thing, is that the United States is challenging our existing food labelling. They don't want us to have such detailed food labelling, which means that we not only may we end up with things in our foods that we may choose not to have, and we prefer not to buy those foods, but we won't actually know if those chemicals and other additives are in the foods themselves. And then I would like to just move on to cosmetics. Things like anything that we put on our face, toiletries, shampoos. There's quite a few chemicals that are currently used in the US that are not allowed here. In the UK, more than 1,300 different chemicals have been banned for use in cosmetics and toiletries. In the US, only 11. So we're talking about over 1,000 times more banned chemicals in US cosmetics, including apparently cosmetics that are manufactured and marketed for children. And the other thing I would like to say is that things like formaldehyde, parabens, triclosan and phthalates, these are things that we know cause harm. Take, for example, phthalates. It's a hard word to say. Phthalates, often in shampoos, not in the UK, I hasten to add, but they have been associated with smaller testicular volume and, as importantly, poor sperm quality. So one can only imagine the implications of that for fertility, for example, for people who really, really want to have children. So I feel deeply, deeply sorry for the American population that is subject to all of these chemicals and lack of regulations or lower standards. Whether they voted for a particular administration or not, they're stuck with it. But we don't have to be stuck with it. Sadly, our MPs do have limited power at the moment to influence our trade negotiations with the US. But if everybody listening to this video wrote to their MP and made their feelings clear, then we can actually start to change things. And that's what we need. Trade isn't a bad thing, but trade needs to build a better future for us all, not a worse one. Thanks very much.